One party wants to tax the land under your own home, not the rental, the house you actually live in, and they want to tax it every year, whether you sell it or not, but it's not the party you're thinking of, which is why I've ranked New Zealand's political parties based on how much their policies could impact and shake up the housing market, and we're going to count them down from smallest to biggest impact because New Zealanders are heading to the polls on the 7th of November, and you need to understand what each party is putting forward and what it could cost you. But just keep in mind that I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. What I am going to do is walk you through each party's property policies and what they could mean for a typical Kiwi property investor. Ultimately, it's up to you for who to vote for. At level 5, we've got the party that would shake up the property market the least from where we are today, and they are the National Party. And that's because National have basically made all the changes they wanted to over the last 3 years. Since taking government in November 2023, they reintroduced interest deductibility. For an investor with a $500K mortgage, that could be $8,250 less tax per year than would otherwise be the case. They cut the bright line test from 10 years to 2 years, and they shook up the rental market. They introduced pet bonds, so tenants can have more pets or have more rights to have a pet. They changed fixed term tenancies as well, so that they actually are fixed again. They brought back 90-day no-cause terminations. Those are back on the table. So if a tenant misbehaves, they can be removed much more easily. And they also shook up supply with the fast-tracked consenting for larger housing developments, and they're currently rewriting the Resource Management Act. So there's not much left on their list still left to do. So for National, this election will be more about what they won't do. They won't support a capital gains tax. They won't support a wealth tax. So if National wins, you basically get more of what you've got right now, and that's why they're at level 5. Not because their policies have been small in the past, but their policies are already law. And do me a quick favor if you find this useful, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. That's what I look at to know which videos I should do more of. And let me know down in the comments which party's policy worries you most. I look forward to that discussion. At level 4, we've got two parties, ACT and New Zealand First. Now, both would nudge things around, but neither's going to blow the property market up. ACT wants a lower tax country, so no capital gains tax, no wealth tax. They actually want to go the other way. They want to lower both the top tax rate and the trustee tax rate, bringing them both to 28%. So if you're currently paying the top tax rates, for every $100 you earn, you could keep an extra $11. And if you've been investing in a while, this could really add up. Let's say that you've got 2 rental properties, you own them in a trust, they're fully paid off, and they make $50K a year in taxable income. This policy would save you $5,500 a year in tax, about $105 a week extra in your pocket. New Zealand First is where things get interesting though, because in May this year, Winston Peters announced that New Zealand First would campaign to buy back BNZ from its Australian parent and then merge it in with Kiwibank. This could involve spending anywhere from $7.5 to $30 billion to create the National Bank of New Zealand, depending on whose estimates you listen to. Now, how much does this actually shake up the property market? That policy in particular, probably not too much. If anything, it removes competition in the mortgage market rather than adding to it because you're taking one bank out. But something interesting happened at their party conference just in July. New Zealand First members voted through something else, a policy that would see the government buy houses alongside first home buyers. So instead of you buying the whole house yourself, the government buys part of the house alongside that first home buyer, both owning a share. Then, over time, the government either sells their share back to you if you're a first home buyer, or they wait until you sell and take their slice of whatever it's worth by then. And the idea here is that because the government can borrow money at cheaper interest rates, you, or a first home buyer, might get a lower interest rate than the big banks are currently charging. Now, keep in mind that this isn't policy yet. Deputy Leader Shane Jones says they're still crunching the numbers. But here's the bit I didn't actually expect. Shane Jones actually has named the risk himself. He said that if you get this policy wrong, it could actually push property prices up because developers would start treating the government as a guaranteed buyer, but it would shake the market up, which is why I put New Zealand first at level 4. And look, there's a lot to get through in this video. We've got 7 parties, 5 levels, dozens of policies. So I've turned everything into a one-page cheat sheet. Just click the link in the description, scan the QR code on screen and grab that for free. At level 3, I'm going to put Labour, and this is where the countdown really starts to bite, because Labour has officially announced its tax policy for the 2026 election, which includes a capital gains tax. And the way this works is, let's say you buy a rental property when the policy kicks in July 2027, you spend $500K on that rental property. 10 years later, you sell it for $1 million. It's doubled in value. That is a $500K profit. And so you'd get to keep 360 grand of that, and the IRD would take $140,000. Now, since this announcement, a lot of investors have emailed me asking, well, what about properties that I already own? Well, let's say you bought a property a decade ago for 300K, and today it's worth, we're going to call it $700,000. Would you have to pay tax on that 400K gain that you've already made? The answer is no. You only pay tax under this policy on any house price increases you get after July 2027. But let's say at that point, your property is still worth 700K, you hold on to it for another 10 more years, and you sell it for $1 million. Again, that first 400K that you've made from the house price going up, you still get that tax-free. It's the extra 300K gain you made after July 2027. That's what the IRD would take a slice of. Though, keep in mind that it's not just investment properties that this applies to. Holiday homes, commercial properties, second homes, or maybe a property you co-own with one of your kids or a parent who happens to live in it, that would all be included. But interestingly, even the would-be future and former Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has already spotted the loophole, because he's figured out that you only pay this tax when you sell, not while you hold the property. And when asked about paying the capital gains tax on his holiday home, he said he never plans to sell the property, so he's not going to have to pay that capital gains tax, which means if you're a long-term investor living off the rent, maybe you decide that you're never going to sell that property. Maybe you just live off the rental income, borrow against the properties if you want to spend a little bit more, then you pass those properties on to your kids and they can then sell them tax-free on your death date. It's the same pattern you see with capital gains taxes overseas and the ability to walk around that tax. And it's important to say that some property investors still decide to vote for a party that wants to tax them more, because the truth is, I know that you're not just a property investor. You're a mum, a dad, a nurse, an engineer, a person voting for a range of policies that you genuinely believe will be the right track for the future of New Zealand. You're not just picking politicians as a property investor. You're a whole person, and that's how you're going to make your voting decision. So while I'm talking about property policies today, keep in mind that this is just one aspect of each party's policy platform. So I understand that that's what you're going to make your decision on. Now, at level 2, this is where the market really starts to get shaken up, because the Greens are planning to introduce a 2.5% annual tax on net assets over $10 million for an individual or $20 million for a couple. But that excludes the family home. That threshold is important because last time the Greens campaigned on a wealth tax, the threshold they were campaigning on was just $2 million per individual. This time it's like $10 million, which means, according to party leader Marama Davidson, 99.7% of Kiwis wouldn't pay a cent. So this tax basically bites only those at the very, very top. And for most property investors, even ones with 3, 4, 5 rental properties, you wouldn't be anywhere near that $10 million threshold. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, like last time they were campaigning on this policy, I was talking about how this could ruin mum and dad property investors who had been investing for a while. But I actually don't have those same fears this time because the threshold is 10 mil rather than 2 mil. Instead, the real shake-up for investors in the Green Party manifesto is their plan to repeal the interest deductibility rules that National just brought in. And they're also planning to bring back the 10-year bright line test. Now, if we just zoom in on the interest deductibility rules and what that would mean for my own portfolio, I've got about $3 million worth of debt across my rental properties, and at current interest rates, that's about $150,000 of interest per year. Now, under the Greens, none of that cost counts when I calculate my tax each year. So it would look like my portfolio is making an extra 150 grand in profit per year, despite the fact that I've still got to pay 150 grand per year to the banks in mortgage interest. But if my portfolio looks 150K more profitable to the tax man, then I've got to pay way more tax on that. And on top of that, they also want to put tax rates up. So all up, this policy, or between their higher tax rates and the interest deductibility, that would cost me an extra $67,000 a year in tax every year. An extra roughly $1,300 a week in tax, even though my portfolio didn't magically get 150K more profitable. And the reason this bites much more than, say, Labor's tax policy is because you pay this every year, whereas with Labor's capital gains tax, as Chris Hipkins has showed us, you only pay that when you sell. Now, would this policy actually come into place? Well, the Greens would need to get Labor to agree, assuming that the centre-left parties won the election, were able to form a coalition government after November 7th. And Labor has said that their capital gains tax is the only revenue-gathering tax policy that they're campaigning on. But they also said that they haven't ruled interest deductibility in or out, so we're going to have to wait for another announcement. And just before we reveal the number one party that would shake up the property market, as part of my research for this video, we actually got in touch with the media teams of some of the parties to clarify their policies, as well as reading all of their policies online. Now, one party I haven't ranked is Te Pāti Māori. Not because they don't matter, they definitely do, but because as I record this, they haven't published that much policy yet. It's 3 bullet points without a lot of detail if I look at their housing policy right now. And I don't want to just tell you what they planned to do 3 years ago, because it could be different today. So out of respect for them, I won't try and guess what their policy will be, and I just won't include them in a tier here. But I also know that politicians sometimes say things online, maybe on social media, or maybe at an in-person event. So if you've actually heard something different from what I'm saying here from a politician, or after we release this, they've had another announcement, let us know down in the comments so we all have access to the same information. But at level 1, the biggest shake-up to the market doesn't come from a party that's currently in Parliament. It comes from the Opportunity Party. And I've included them here because although Opportunity Party has never made it into Parliament, in the June Roy Morgan poll, they hit 6.5%, which if the election was held on that day and they got that result, that would be enough for 8 seats in the Parliament. And literally this morning that I'm recording this video, the New Zealand Herald's poll of polls put them over the 5% threshold. And my ranking in this video isn't about whether the policy is likely to become reality. I'm ranking them based on impact if they happened. And TOP's policy is genuinely the most consequential of the lot, because they want to bring in what's called a land tax. And that would charge you up to 1.75% of the value of your land per year. And that's the killer that makes TOP's policy different from every other party on this list. It happens every year and it applies to the family home. Every other party's policy only applies to second homes, holiday homes, and investment properties. But under this proposal, every homeowner gets taxed. Now, let me show what that looks like on 2 of my own rental properties. One's got a land value of about $250,000. The other one is about $200K. Combined, the land value is $450,000. Of course, I've got a few more rentals, but these were the first ones I checked. 1.75% of $450K is $7,875 a year, or $151 a week in extra tax on land that I already own. Now, if I look at just my own house, once I add in their universal basic income, because they want to take this money and then distribute it back to everybody through what's called a universal basic income, or I think they're calling it a citizen's income, I'd actually be better off if I only just look at my own home. But if I add in all of my rentals, I'd then be in the red. And I did find it quite interesting that when you plug your own numbers into Opportunity Party's tax reset calculator to see the impact on you from all their policies together, which is what you should judge it on, they don't let you put in your rental properties, but the impact is clear. Opportunity wants landlords to either develop their land to cover the tax or to sell them. Otherwise, in their own words, you could be taking quite the haircut this financial year. On top of that, they want to stop first home buyers using their KiwiSavers for their first home. So Opportunity comes in at level 1 because they've told you that they want to shake up the market. They project that property prices could potentially come down 10 to 15% if these policies are enacted. And they say that's the point on their website, right? And just note that I'm not saying that Opportunity Party's policies are bad. I've never said that about any party's policies in this video. I've just told you what the policies are and the impact. And remember, you can get the cheat sheet with all of the policies down in the description. Now, of all the policies I've walked through today, the one that's most likely to come in is definitely Labor's capital gains tax. After all, they're the biggest opposition party right now. So if you want a deep dive on that tax, watch this video next. Click the video on your screen and I'll see you in there.